Are Colombia's FARC rebels returning to war? A former commander's issued a call to arms, accusing the government of betraying the 2016 peace deal. So can the accord be saved, or will peace be shattered again? This is Inside Story. Hello everyone, I'm Kamahl Santamaria. Welcome to Inside Story. We're talking Colombia today, which for the past 3 years has looked to be on the path to peace after more than 50 years of war with the FARC leftist rebels. But that peace is now under threat from one of the same men who agreed to it. Let's rewind to 2016, the signing ceremony where the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, agreed to lay down their arms in a historic deal with the government. Colombia's president at the time was Juan Manuel Santos. The whole thing even earned him a Nobel Peace Prize, while the FARC's lead negotiator, Ivan Marquez, promised Colombians a new era of hope. But now, just 3 years later, he is urging FARC members to pick up their weapons again, saying the government has betrayed the deal.
Firmamos el acuerdo de La Habana.
When we signed the agreement of Havana, we did it with the conviction that it was possible to change the lives of the humble and the dispossessed. But the state has not fulfilled even the most important of the obligations, that is to guarantee the life of its citizens and particularly to prevent their murder for political reasons. All of this trick, this betrayal, this perfidy, the unilateral modification of the text of the accord, the unfulfilled commitments on the part of the state, the judicial setups and insecurity have obliged us to return to the mountains.
Colombia's current president, meanwhile, has announced a special army unit to find and arrest the FARC rebels. Soldiers killed 9 members in one raid on Friday.
I authorized the Joint Command of Special Operations to carry out an offensive operation against this gang of narco-terrorist criminals who are residuals of what was known as the FARC and who are part of the criminal structures that now seek to challenge Colombia. Well, last night, thanks to meticulous and strategic work, Delgado Cucho, a leader of that organization, was killed.
So that was Ivan Marquez, who you saw a moment ago, was a key negotiator in the peace agreement, which was signed almost 3 years ago. Around 13,000 FARC members demobilized. That included around 7,000 soldiers who laid down their arms. As part of the deal, they were promised help reintegrating back into civilian society. FARC was also turned into a political party. It was assigned 10 seats in Colombia's Congress. But hundreds of social leaders, human rights activists and former FARC members have been killed in the past 3 years. And some analysts say the FARC has also fallen short on its commitment to justice. The leadership's been accused of continuing to traffic drugs and failing to provide their victims with reparations. So here is today's panel, all joining us from Bogotá, the capital of Colombia. On Skype, we have got Sergio Guzman, who is the Director of Colombia Risk Analysis. We have Jorge Restropo, the Director of CERAC, the Conflict Analysis Resource Center, and also on Skype, Daniel Garcia-Pena, who is the Professor of Political Science at the National University and a former High Commissioner for Peace of Colombia. Gentlemen, welcome to all three of you. I am conscious that the story of the FARC rebels and the peace deal is not something all of our viewers are going to be completely up to speed on, so I just want to spend a few minutes with you sort of explaining a bit more about some of the main players and what's happened in the last 3 years. Sergio, I'll start with you. Tell me about Ivan Marquez. Tell our viewers about Ivan Marquez, and particularly right now, how strong is his voice? How influential is he? Does he have people, numbers on his side?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Good morning to Jorge and Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here. To begin, Ivan Marquez is a person that has a very long political background. He used to be a member of the House of Representatives under the Unión Patriótica party back in the day in the 1990s, before he returned to conflict with the FARC in the late 1990s. He participated in the negotiations in El Caguán, and then was the lead negotiator of the negotiations in Havana. So this man is a person who has a very long-standing political background and is well-versed both in letters but also in fighting. He's believed to be very close with Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro as well. If you look at the video and if you look at the numbers, the video really had two things to say. First, it was an aspirational video. It demonstrated that the FARC wants to reach out to other members of society, particularly their former fighters, disgruntled members of civil society living in rural areas who feel that they haven't been dealt the right cards under the peace agreement, for instance, with land reparations or with a change in the drug policy, etc. So he's casting a wide net. More importantly, he also reaches out to the ELN. But this is an important point. His video doesn't suggest that he has an alliance with the ELN or he has important support from these members. He's not demonstrating it. And if the video is a show of strength in terms of military might, having 30 people armed to the teeth, in particular a blind man like Jesus Santrich, isn't going to be very scary. Although in the video there's individuals like alias El Paisa who belong to a very fearful Teófilo Forero column, which was responsible for a lot of terrorist attacks and very intrusive, but it doesn't demonstrate capacity in and of itself.
Okay, thank you for all of that. Let's go to Jorge now. Jorge, Marquez said in that video, well, he said a lot of things, but one of the things he said, the betrayal from the government has obliged us to return to the mountains. What exactly does that mean?
Well, I mean, first, thank you very much, Kamahl, for having us. Hello to Sergio and Daniel. I reckon that Ivan Marquez, it's basically trying to instill fear in the Colombian population, but this is a threat that still has not materialized. And all his discourse, it's basically a very well staged composition in order to present himself as a leader of an emerging guerrilla. But one has to be really careful in assessing this as a threat. I do believe that there is a higher risk, but nevertheless, what they're trying to accomplish with this is basically to avoid persecution by justice authorities from transitional justice here in Colombia, but also from the justice of the United States that is accusing one of them, Santrich, and maybe himself, Ivan Marquez, for narco-trafficking, international narco-trafficking crimes. Then basically I reckon one has to be very, very careful in not overstating the level of threat that this group poses to the Colombian society and economy.
Okay. And Daniel, let's bring you into the conversation as well. I wonder if you can tell us about the other Ivan Duque, who is now the Colombian leader. He did not sign the peace deal. Obviously, that was his predecessor. But can you again explain to us what his position on the deal has been? Because now he is speaking with a very strong tone and saying, we're going after the FARC.
Well, yes. First of all, thank you. And also, I want to say hello to Jorge and Sergio. No doubt, Ivan Duque was elected president by a coalition that came together to oppose the peace process. Remember that back in 2016, we had a referendum in the country, and a coalition that voted no and was able to win that vote was precisely the same coalition that elected Ivan Duque. Since assuming the presidency, he has modified the discourse that he had during the campaign of doing away with the agreement, and has had a on one hand has been committed to fulfilling the agreement as far as the reincorporation of the FARC rebels. But as far as the broader aspects of the agreement, the issues of land reform and issues of the drug trade or the political reform, there has been no movement whatsoever. And on the contrary, earlier this year, President Duque tried to veto parts of the transitional justice system in Colombia, that was overridden by the Congress. But nevertheless, it's clear that the government does not have a commitment to the process, and on the contrary, many of the actions on the part of the government simply have gone against the implementation. So this act on the part of Ivan Marquez and his group will strengthen the discourse of the government and their military reaction against these new FARC rebels will no doubt increase the tension within the country and also against this new group.
Gentlemen, let's look at some of the reasoning there. Now that we've sort of laid out some of the background there, the reasoning here. Marquez says the government has betrayed the deal. The government would say of the FARC, hey, you've continued to traffic drugs, you've continued to betray the deal as well. Is it one of these? Okay, I'm going to go to Jorge because you're shaking your head there. Tell me why.
Yeah. I mean, because one cannot say that the government of Ivan Duque has betrayed the agreement or has repudiated the agreement, not in its totality nor in its part. Although, you know, implementation, it's quite complex institutionally, organizationally, financially, economically. It is a rather a huge task, one has to say, and that will take at least 15 years in terms of the implementation. Although there has been attempts by the government party, which is a minority party in Congress, to take apart by pieces, especially the jurisdiction for peace, the transitional justice system that, as Daniel referred, one cannot say that there is a concerted effort to be able to tear apart or to repudiate the agreement. And this is very important. That does not justify the rearming of this group of ex-FARC leaders. One has to be very careful again with that in terms of not creating a new discourse for the justification of coming back to violence here in Colombia. That's why I shake my head.
Okay, Sergio, let me come back to you then. Maybe it's just, or maybe you'd like to comment on what Jorge said, but maybe it's also just that, you know, after so many years of war, there's just an inherent distrust between both sides, and they're not going to see eye to eye, and they're not going to believe the other side can stay true to the deal.
Look, I'll say this. The blame on returning to war lies solely on the FARC in their decision to rearm. Having said that, I disagree with what Jorge is saying in the sense that I do think that the government has been lukewarm in its support of the entirety of the peace agreement. The government is very supportive of the disarmament, the demobilization, and reincorporation component of the agreement, but is much less enthusiastic about the chapter on land reform, the chapter on the trade of illegal drugs, the political participation of FARC members, as well as the justice component, which was mentioned earlier. I think that both sides have some legitimate claim to attest that the counterparty is not making the threshold for the compliance with the peace agreement, but it would be far-fetched to say that they both share an equal amount of blame. I think that in their decision to rearm, the FARC is definitely taking a heavy stance, but they're also condemning themselves, and they're putting at risk a lot of the former combatants who are still incorporating the process, who are participating in politics, and who are campaigning for the local elections, which are taking place on October 27th, coupled with the killings of social leaders that have happened in Colombia. This endangers them all.
Daniel, your thoughts? Is it going to, I mean, you're coming from a position as well as a former High Commissioner for Peace in Colombia. I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing you would place more blame on the FARC here in the way that Sergio has?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to be very, very careful. I don't think we can talk about the FARC or Ivan Marquez as the leader of the FARC. Let's not forget that this is a splinter group. He represents a small faction of the FARC. The vast majority of the FARC is with the peace process. Close more than 90% of the fighters are committed to the peace process. The leader of the FARC, Timochenko, has come out very, very clearly in favor of supporting the process. So I think I would be very careful not to allow Marquez to monopolize the name of FARC. The FARC is with the peace process. It's a splinter group, a relatively small group, part of the group that has decided to rearm. But I think it's vital for everybody to understand that the vast majority of FARC and the FARC leadership, with the exception of Marquez and Santrich and others, but the vast majority of them are committed to the process and are committed to continue in the political process, in the democratic process. So I think that does not mean that this is not an important blow to the process. There's no doubt that politically speaking, the message that Ivan Marquez is giving is going to definitely hurt the process. But I think it would be not correct to give this group the right to speak in name of the FARC. They are trying to relive the FARC. They are trying to somehow rekindle the elements that led to the rise of FARC 50 years ago. But I think that today, the conditions of the country, the vast majority, not only of the FARC members, but of Colombian society, reject the armed struggle and hope that the majority of the FARC members will continue with the peace process.
Jorge, you're itching to get in there. Go ahead.
Yes, Kamahl, if I may, I want to reinforce that point in the following way. This is not that we are going back to conflict. This is not the emergence of a new guerrilla group. What is happening here is that there is a very small group of commanders, a minority, the most radical of them, those that fear the most from prosecution, either from transitional justice here in Colombia or from the international justice in the United States for narco-trafficking crimes. And what they're trying to put forward is a discourse to try to instill fear in the Colombian society while they try to organize this escape from justice. And something which is very important is that they are doing this from Venezuela, from the border from Venezuela maybe, because that is their hideaway. That is the way that they can organize this crime. But we are not going back to conflict. We are not seeing the emergence of a new guerrilla group. We, as Sergio mentioned, we are not seeing this alliance with the ELN in itself. We are not seeing yet violence. And we have to be aware of the risk, but not throw away the baby with the bathtub. You know, it's more than 95% of ex-combatants, and I will say the entirety of the leaders, but for this handful of leaders of the FARC, are committed with peace, and the trust that the Colombian society has put on this peace process, it's, I will say, rather solid. The stability of peace is not threatened by the emergence of this group.
Okay, then. So in that case, and I'll put this to all three of you.
If I may, Kamahl,
just quickly, Sergio.
Me. There's a nomenclature issue because the name FARC, when the armed group made the peace deal with the government, they started a political party, and they could have named that political party whatever it is that they wanted to name it. And there was a discussion internally, and then they decided to name it FARC. And now that Ivan Marquez is starting the splinter group, like Daniel pointed out, they chose to go with exactly the same name. So there is a lot of room for confusion here, and I think that we do have the responsibility to make the distinction between all of them.
Okay, maybe this still leads to the point I was going to make. Rather than all of this being about the risk of returning to war, let's flip it on its head and say that there's an opportunity here. If Ivan Duque ran on the idea of renegotiating the deal, is this actually a chance to do that, to renegotiate it, to firm up what you were just saying, Jorge, the fact that a lot of people still support this deal and it shouldn't all just fall apart because of one man? Daniel, I'll start with you. What is is there an opportunity here?
I think there's an opportunity not to renegotiate, but to implement what was agreed upon. The agreement establishes elements that have to do with the reincorporation, and I think, and I agree with the other members of the panel, that in fact the government of President Duque has committed to going forward with the reincorporation, which is a good thing. I think that we all agree on that. But unfortunately, the agreement is not only about reincorporation. The agreement included a very important aspect of land reform. This is a conflict that has to do with years and years of dispossession of land and rights for the peasants. That issue has been just completely ignored by the government. Issues that have to do with the drug trade, with political reform. So I think it's an opportunity for the government to understand that the best way to move forward is to implement and to actually not only for the FARC. I think that many times we look at the agreement as an agreement that is favoring FARC or is in favor of FARC, but the agreement has many things that are in favor of Colombian society, especially the peasants and the countryside. And that is where I think the government has to act more clearly in favor of implementing the agreement. And I think that would be the best way, not only to for the Colombian state to fulfill its commitments, but also to take away all these arguments that Ivan Marquez and his group have signaled out to justify supposedly their decision to take up arms. So I think that it is an opportunity. Unfortunately, we have not seen the government willing to move forward on the peace process. But I do believe that this situation, as in fact Timochenko, the leader of the FARC, pointed out, he said this was a very bad news for the country, but there was a good side that it clarifies who's with the process and who is not with the process. And I think that now Duque has the responsibility to, with the FARC leadership that is with the peace process, that is committed to continue with the peace process, to in fact move forward in the implementation.
Jorge, can Duque do this on his own? I don't like this word, but bilateral, between the government and the FARC, or does there need to be a third party, some sort of broker?
Well, I reckon there is no interest or political capacity in the Centro Democrático government, the party of Ivan Duque, nor capacity of negotiation in his government to move forward or to try to open up the agreement. Also, the agreement is quite well tied legally, constitutionally, even by international law standards, to think that we are going to see changes or a renegotiation. He's, on the other side, not on speaking terms at party level with the FARC party. I reckon, going back to your previous question or line of questioning, that this is indeed an opportunity that the Colombian society has to catalyze an acceleration of the implementation of the agreement, especially on those areas in terms of rural reform, development plans that are needed to sustain peace building in rural areas, in the regions that had been affected by the conflict and other forms of violence. I'm rather less optimistic about the role of transitional justice. Although there is also pressure now, increased pressure for this transitional justice system in all its components, truth-seeking, proper justice persecution, and the seeking of the disappeared, to be much more quicker, to act much more quicker. I reckon that we have a really badly designed justice system in Colombia, including the transitional justice system. Then on that side, I'm less optimistic. And if something is going to fail on this peace process, I reckon it's going to be justice.
Gentlemen, it's been an enlightening discussion with you. Started wondering about the prospects for war, but finished it by thinking about the framework still being there for peace. So I want to thank you all for your contributions today. Really enjoyed it. And thank you as well for joining us for this edition of Inside Story. Plenty more for you online. Inside Stories in the shows section at aljazeera.com. If you want to see this or any of our discussions again. We're also at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're on Twitter at AJ Inside Story. I'm at Kamahl AJE if you want to message me directly. From the whole team, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.